Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Build versus Buy Your Employee Experience. How about both? My name is Anna Bruning, and I'm the Demand Generation Manager here at Workgrid. Joining me today as your presenter is Frank Pathiel, Director of Strategy and Partnership at Workgrid. So just to start off with some quick housekeeping before we get going, we'll be saving the last 5 minutes of the presentation today for Q&As. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions throughout the presentation, and we'll work on getting to as many of those questions as possible after the webinar. We'll also be sending out a recording of the webinar afterwards in case there is anything you missed. So this webinar is meant to answer questions we've gotten from many companies that are looking for better ways to support their employees. They are struggling with the right mix of building and buying a solution that meets their needs now and enables them to evolve their experience going forward. Frank is going to provide more context on the agenda, so I won't steal his thunder. I'm going to hand things over to Frank and jump back in for the last 5 minutes during Q&A. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Frank.
Thank you, Anna. Let me take 30 seconds, maybe a minute, to tell you a little bit about our story. Workgrid Software was born out of a Liberty Mutual insurance company objective to improve the employee experience for 50,000 employees. It took 2 years of work to release version 1, a release that was met immediately with high praise, both internally as well as by the external analysts. The so-called Liberty story became a mainstay at many digital workplace conferences. And by 2017, it was clear that the technology made sense as a standalone entity, which is how, in 2017, Workgrid Software was born. At Workgrid, we believe employees are happiest, fulfilled, and most engaged when focusing on work that matters. Every employee has potential, passion, and purpose. And today's digital workplace experience is creating significant inefficiencies and employee disengagement, all taking away from employees' potential. So at Workgrid, we're solving for this complexity. Our mission is to make work simpler, more efficient, and engaging. So what does this mean? Well, take this environment. We start with a couple of point tools and a couple of enterprise solutions for the good of the business. Over time, more situations arise. More point tools are needed, perhaps mergers and acquisitions by major vendors, but more applications show up. In time, we start to see replication, and it's well-meaning. Indeed, even single vendors will replicate and create multiple versions of the same software in their own suites. In time, you will see a little bit of crossover, and it's all well-meaning with good reasons for these applications. Nonetheless, as complexity starts to spawn, eventually users become a little inundated. And over time, the environment becomes fractured. Now, this is not something that's being done maliciously. Indeed, this growth is organic, and sometimes it's forced upon us. It's just, well, a reality. So we've become accustomed to this. So it's worth bringing this slide back. And it's worth stepping back and looking at the stats and costs. Anecdotally, at this moment that we're in right now, where so many people have shifted to work, I am hesitant, but I believe that we're actually going to hear from people that these stats are going way up. It's to be expected. For the past 10 years, we've been slowly talking about the future of work, but really seeing it as a tomorrow problem. And the fact of the matter is, right now, where we are in March of 2020, it's still something of a tomorrow problem, but we're getting a preview of what's coming right now. So it's topical, and it's worth taking some time to think about it. With that in mind, I want to structure our time as follows. I want to start by defining two guardrails on our road, overbuying and overbuilding. Next, I want to focus on the rules of the road, those rules that keep us off the guardrail on the one side and the guardrail on the other side. And then finally, I want to get quite specific on some priorities and requirements you can use to keep moving down that road. So let's talk not just about buying versus building. Let's think a little bit about overbuilding and overbuying. Let's start with a stipulation. If budget and time are infinite and the perfect experience can be built for you, it could be done. The thing is, in IT, infinite budget was never a real consideration. But of late, over the past couple of years, we're seeing the emergence of digital agencies who focused on the external experience. Indeed, these agencies are often visiting, emphasis on visit, and I'll get to it. They're visiting the internal side of the house and pitching a perfect digital experience for the employee. Can they build it? Sure. Does it take a long time? Yes. That would be fine, but the problem is that infinite budget is never real, as is infinite time. The fact of the matter is that over time, the needs of the business will shift and suddenly something breaks. We were talking just yesterday to somebody who had built something not unlike this. And the second they changed out a help system, suddenly things stopped working. Now, if your agency visitors have left, and as I said, they're visitors, they're not staying, it's left to you to keep building, often without the large budget that rode in on the initial project. Let's talk a little bit about overbuying. Look, let's start with the stipulation that I personally am old enough to remember that there was a time that one application was your employee experience. It was Lotus Notes. We lived in a simpler time. So it had a little bit of email, it had a little bit of customer, a little bit of inventory, and some forms. And that was the world as I know it. Lotus Notes is no longer a thing. What is emerging in the market is the idea of bring your own technology. We're used to the idea from our consumer lives that if an app doesn't work, there's another app on my phone just a second away, likely free or easy to acquire. The pressure that this builds for businesses is that there's always groups that need something. Now, this request comes in as a need. Is it a need or a want? Often debatable. The end result is that you are fine in the application you live in, but if you need to do something else, something out of the norm, you're lost trying to understand this other application. Indeed, you're just trying to figure out how to log into it. And it's got random menus and screens that offer you no value. They were there because the person who brought the thing in saw value in it. But to you, the visitor, it's a bit overwhelming. So in the end, if you overbuild, you're going to hit the right-hand guardrail. And if you overbuy, you're going to go hit the left-hand side, which is median. The question is, how do we stay in the center of the road? For that, let's talk about a few tenets to follow in order to stay right down the center of the lane. Number one, get your foundation right. The eventuality we need to design for is not just today, it's tomorrow as well. You have to think about a platform that's focused on giving an employee the varied experience he or she may need versus one that does some employee experience while really being the help desk business. Next, we want to put the employee at the center and make sure we can target and tailor to what the user wants and needs. So as we look at the platform of the future, we've got to think about what are the priorities. Down the right-hand side, we have to think about new experiences, like conversational ones and voice experiences that we're experiencing in our consumer lives. The idea that employees are at the center, and the idea that the custom-built applications we're building are where we're putting our business intelligence, where we're putting in the things that differentiate us as a business. Inside the experience layer, leave it to go and do things like rule sets, audience targeting. And further on down the line, understand that the underlying applications can change out, and you want that to take place because commodity software is out there. And as we've discussed earlier, BYOT is a thing. We're going to see the idea that an application that we're using today might change out tomorrow and priorities will shift. All right, now if we've gotten our foundation right, let's turn around and think a little bit about building based on employee intent. What does that look like? Well, for this, I want to bring in the slide by Josh Burson, a leading HR industry analyst. Now, we recognize all the blue boxes, systems. We can even probably put names against them of vendors that we associate with them. The thing is, as employees or as consumers, and let's think about ourselves as consumers for a second, we're not thinking about this system or that system. We're thinking about these things we're doing up top, the employee journeys. We're thinking about, I'm in job 1 and I want to apply for job 2. I need to get a little bit of training on something. I need to go and perform a complex function like changing my benefits or redesigning something around claims, or it's open enrollment season, or I've got a PC and I want to move to a Mac. We're not thinking about help desk systems and HR systems. We're thinking about those things that we're trying to do. Oftentimes, not as part of our job, but as to step away from our job, perform that function, and get back to the work we do. This is the idea of thinking about those little journeys the employee is taking. Now, if we've built correctly for the employee, with the employee at the center, the question is, how do we deliver to it? For this, I want to bring in the slide from Dion Hinchcliffe, a leading analyst in IT circles. The upper half of the screen really talks about the current landscape. A lot of applications separated from conversations around the applications and documents in other places. Things kind of loosely tied together, oftentimes by emails or web pages with links to things. It's really not a deeply integrated digital workplace, which is what we really want. The question is how to get there. Bear in mind, the triangles, which are the use cases, can shift. The pentagons, which are the apps, are commodity and are going to move around. Docs move and shift. Mergers, acquisitions, things that have been deprecated and shifted away. And there are lots of conversational interfaces, both general ones, email, as well as conversations that are hosted within the source systems. So how do we pull together all of that into the idea of a deeply integrated digital workplace? We can't do it as a monolithic project. We were going to run into that same issue we were talking about earlier, the huge project that's perfect till it breaks. Instead, let's think about lightweight integrations, little hits of value, something that we can do very quickly to deliver value to the consumer. This is again like our consumer lives. The idea of Netflix continuously iterating, the idea of Yelp or Grubhub, continuously adding little new features that make the experience better for us. This is how we expect to have innovation delivered to us quickly, little chunks, building upon work that was done earlier. Finally, if we've gotten our foundation right, we've built on intent, we're hitting continuous delivery, how do we talk about being future-proof? Understand, it's not just about the experience layer and all those things underneath it. It's also the idea that there's AI and bots that are going to be coming in. But if we don't want to think that far ahead, just think about the applications that are there. There's always a temptation to push the experience into those applications, but the fact of the matter is the applications are going to shift. We are in an era of commodity software. If I am used to working in one application and the way one works, but we've shifted it to something else, do I have to undertake change management, or I'm going to try and cling to that system because it's what I'm used to? If, on the other hand, we can abstract away the information that's in those systems into the experience layer so that we can change the underlying application, that's how we start to get towards future-proofing ourselves. Now, if we can hit these 4 tenets, this is the way that we try and stay down the center of the road and away from overbuilding and away from overbuying. These are really more rules to live by than they are technical features. What we want to transition into is really some requirements and some technical features of these systems. If we've built that good foundation, these are some of the requirements that foundation has to meet. Let's start with the platform's got to be open and extensible, meaning it's got to have SDKs, APIs, it's got to be easy to deploy, it's got to be scalable. Low code and no code, because we want to actually push the configuration of the application as close to the business as possible so they're not round tripping back into IT in order to make changes to how they're doing things. Put it in the hands of the business owner in a low code, no code, or simple chat bot interface to make the changes they want to make. Next, again, we were talking about not overbuilding. Let's think about how we can make it flexible and easy to integrate. And in particular, are there out-of-the-box integrations? If we can make use of an out-of-box integration very quickly, perhaps we can take that 100% of the use cases and wish lists and deliver 80 right out of the box. The question to ask at that point is, does the remaining 20 really need to be delivered, or indeed does it shift? And if it shifts, maybe we build a slightly different but smaller scale customized application. But this is the value of flexible and easy to integrate. And it's implied that speed matters. Third, we want to think about multi-system workflows. And this is where a lot of applications attempt to hold the entire world in their purview. The fact of the matter is, and we'll get into some use cases here, a lot of the things we do have to hop across a lot of systems. And this is some area that you can actually acquire a lot of political capital. And if you think about it, we want to continuously engage the user. We want to get them excited. It's important that we get the users on our side. And one of the ways you can do that is looking at workflows that span multiple systems, and can we bring them into one aggregate experience so that I can do something once and what needs to happen in 3 different systems just takes place. This will buy you a lot of goodwill as you move the enterprise across the digital transformation landscape. Now, there is one other audience that matters as much as the common user, and I'm going to call them the accountants. And why do the accountants matter? Well, in the end, the accountants power your ability to go get stuff done. One way you can delight accountants, and I believe delighting accountants is important, is if I can figure out a way to not replace something that's already working, and especially something that's already paid for. What I have in mind is I've got legacy applications. Maybe they're running behind the firewall. Maybe they're running on an older piece of software, but they work well, except for the fact that the UX is awful and they don't have AI and they don't run on a phone. On the other hand, if we can figure out a way to modernize that UX, well, then that means that the whole scale replacement of that system goes away, and I'm working backwards to just modernizing it. I'm shifting dollars to someplace else. In the end, as you work through your process, you will find that delighting the accountants will help power the work that you want to get done. Let's talk about a couple of case studies. And I want to start with one that is somewhat personal. Now, this company in particular had a lot of challenges, but the one I want to fixate on, or focus on, I guess, is one that's personal. And the reason I bring up one that's personal is this is how you actually engage the users. You start delivering value that matters to them. Bear in mind, we're talking about putting the employee at the center. So deliver value to that employee right away. So how do we start? Well, this is one that was very simple. I'm an employee, I'm at work, and I want to go on vacation. What I don't want to do is have to navigate through Workday to ask and get the approval, and SAP to note my time, and Outlook to go figure out my out of office, and then if I'm a developer or in IT, Jira to go reassign tasks. Look, I just want to go on vacation. So what we looked at with Workgrid was a very simplified application, something that allowed me to schedule my time off, push for approval, and a separate experience for a manager to say, sure. And in the background, the systems that needed to be notified about things got notified. It's much easier for me to request time off, know that the things that need to get done, so that I can go on my beach vacation, hopefully very far away from anybody else, in peace. So what have we seen in this case? Well, number one, clearly it's open and extensible because the complexities of SAP and Workday, et cetera, hidden from me. And secondly, it's a multi-system workflow. And this is that big value point that users are scared of. You know, how do I hop across those 3 systems? If I can bring them all into one place where the information that those systems needs are just aggregated and pushed out, I'm happier for it. Finally, it's flexible and easy to integrate. I change out Workday for Oracle HCM or something like that, those details are actually hidden from the user. That's ideal because I don't have to worry about change management or I used to do vacation requests this way and I have a link and I forgot where that link is and damn it, it's a new system. Take that complexity out of the equation altogether. Next, let's talk about a case study that focuses instead of the entire enterprise, but really on a line of business. One way we can engage users is you find a set of users who clearly have requirements, understand those requirements, and truly engage them in a way that delights them. In this particular case, we were dealing with a company that had a large field force, and a field force that needed to hop across a number of systems and was not at desks when they were out in the field. So the experience they were used to was coming into a system, having to hop across a VPN and hit a couple of applications. What we did in Workgrid was simplified that a great deal. So let's pull in our demo. And what you see on the screen is an application that pulls in product notifications. And now this could be from BI System 1 run by Team 1, but clicking into it, I can start to understand what those changes are. What you're seeing on the screen is really the things that the company does really well. They're very good at logistics. They pull in new products. This is the stuff that's really their emphasis. This is what separates them from their competitor, not UX, not mobile applications. So focus on the thing that brings you great value, which is screens like this. Similarly, there are other teams in the company that are allowing you to make changes. Again, in this entirely separate BI tool, or maybe a piece of SaaS software, pulling in sales and allowing you to make changes in real time along with alerts. Now, prior to Workgrid's arrival, users had to come in, log in over VPN, hop from system to system, check for email before they left the site to make sure that a price change hadn't popped up. That's way too arduous. Where we want to arrive at is something that's nice and simple. So what do the users get in the end? Well, clearly, it's an open and extensible platform because you didn't see me log in to Tableau or Power BI. Next, it's a multi-system workflow because my task is to go to the customer site, do a couple of things. It's not to go hop across 4 different systems. It was tailored for the experience of being on site. And finally, not necessarily apparent, but in the case of this customer, some of that work was being done in Tableau with one front end, but being moved to Power BI, an entirely separate front end. To the end user who doesn't need that front end while on site, it was hidden from them. The details, the complexity, the menus, the navigation, taken away. That means that you were able to be in Tableau on Friday. They make the switch over the weekend. On Monday, the user still thinks it's the same thing. But in fact, the back-end system has shifted. That's because it's flexible and easy to integrate with. Next, I want to talk about probably the use case that gets brought to us the most. And again, there are lots and lots of experiences that people go through, but we want to focus on the employee experience, the employee journey. And we're in particular thinking about certain journeys that people take. One journey that almost every employee takes is onboarding because, with very few exceptions, everybody joins an existing company and has to be brought up to speed. And by definition, the onboarding experience is disjointed because you have HR occasionally pinging you with things they want you to do, IT dropping into your life at various points, a department with policies and training and stuff like that, and finally the vagaries of a manager who has their own spin on things. In the end, the employee is left just trying to figure out how to get from system 1 to system 2, and oftentimes it's just tasks piling up but no actual movement. Where we want to get to is one where IT, HR, the department, the manager can work independently, but at the same time, as HR tasks are built out and IT tasks are built out, departments and managers, they organize, but they're hidden away from the employee. What the employee sees is simply a task list that sort of reorganizes for themselves. In action, it looks something like this. On the left-hand side, I see my tasks, what I need to go get done on a day-to-day basis, laid out for me. In the center, I see what those tasks look like from both my view as well as my manager's view, and the ability of that manager to assign those tasks. And finally, we start to see that it's integrated in, not just with the task, but also with the notifications and indeed the approvals. So it's a cohesive experience for the employee. In action, it can actually also be personalized. So as I click into the experience, we start to see that, number one, I'm prompted to go in because something is overdue. Clicking into it, I see that I have an overdue task. Well, what is it? I go in. Oh, a parking form. This is actually a set of stakeholders that are often not even represented in the conversations. The facilities teams, everything from cafeteria menus to how do I reserve a room to the monitor in room 7 is broken to clearly a parking pass. These systems are out there. How do I bring them in? How do I pull them into the digital experience? Because it is part of my lifetime experience. Something like this can actually modernize these systems that are at best forms and wikis and pull them into a modern age. Similarly, I can work my way backwards and start to personalize them. So the idea should be that the underlying capabilities of the application know where I work and start to understand things about me. So it's bringing in most personal information. Or it's working backwards into things like campus maps. Not the map for the campus across the country, the map that matters to me and just me. So this is an example of a personalized experience that matters to the employee. So what did we see here? Well, number one, again, open and extensible because we're hiding the complexities of the underlying system from the user. Number two, flexible and easy to integrate, even pulling in SharePoint forms or maps that are on random drives. But the idea that it can be personalized and put into an app experience that's mobile or desktop or browser. And then finally, a multi-system workflow because everything about onboarding is multi-system. Now, finally, let's talk a little about the last use case, delighting accountants. Now, I came from a background where I used to work on the development of Remedy, and while it's a powerful system, you can use it to schedule all the delivery trucks and all the installations from a cable company that goes from coast to coast. Extremely powerful. Front end, not so much. So what did we do at Workgrid when we started thinking about how we can modernize an ITSM system, which is what Remedy is, to increase the ROA on the back-end system and meet the business needs? Well, it brings to mind kind of a third demo. And it's the idea that I can take that back-end system that is still very powerful and hide a lot of its complexities, the need to log in, a lot of the ability to go and understand the myriad of forms, and oftentimes a UX that's clunky and desktop-oriented, and instead just launch a form out of it. Something that allows me to immediately go in, put in the particulars of a ticket. Indeed, in this use case, we actually also set up so it can be initiated out of a chat bot. I can go in and ask it, hey, I got to go make a change. What type of change would you like to make? And so on. So chat interfaces would go and take this application that is not modern, but powerful, and quickly bring it up into the 21st century without needing to make big investments, complete replacement of it. This is powerful. This type of effort will power the initiative and the buy-in of the enterprise as you start moving down the road towards your digital transformation. All right. So as we talked about, this is really an example of modernizing a legacy intranet and putting a fresh face on it. I want to get into some closing thoughts because you've been a great audience. So, number one, to stay away from overbuilding and overbuying, think about the tenets, those rules of thumb that keep you down the center of the lane. The proper foundation. Think about putting the employee at the center. Deliver quick hits of value. And remember, you are always going to be possibly changing systems out. So be future-proof by inoculating yourself from the possibility that changing a system of record can radically change your digital experience. And be prepared to take advantage of commodity software by changing applications if it makes sense to. And then once we've got that foundation right, think about the right foundation and make sure it's open and extensible, easy to integrate, that it will allow you to deal with multiple channels and multiple system workflows. And where possible, figure out how you can modernize some legacy systems. Finally, and I think this is the most important thing, we talked a little about the agency experience and why agencies matter. Well, agencies are coming into us and they're thinking a lot about the consumer-like experience. We have to do the same. So we have to design around the employee something that's really important to them. And we have to think about consumer-like experiences that delight us, because the bar is being set by the things that we interact with in our consumer lives. And finally, we have to, because again, the agency visits, but you have to live with this long term, we have to think about a foundation that can grow with it, not just be a great experience on day one, but survive the test of time. In the end, that's the goal for long-standing and a digital experience that stands the test of time. I want to thank you for taking your time today. As always, we're happy to answer any questions, and we look forward to talking to you soon.
Okay, thank you, Frank. And just a reminder, if anyone has any questions, you can submit them from the bottom of the screen in the toolbar with the Q&A button. So first question we have, Frank, you mentioned chatbot. Do you have any examples you can share for how that applies?
Yeah, how the chatbot mixes in with the whole decision to build versus buy is a good question. A couple of ways. Number one, the chatbot being somewhat democratized and where you're going to see it evolve to is a place where you can essentially configure your own chat apps and actually push them down into the chatbot interface. So thereby moving the configuration closer to the business. The one that I find really very interesting is the idea of the chatbot being set up in such a way that it will act essentially as a front end to Remedy. So I can go in, ask a question, get some answers, and if needed, actually kick off a ticket. And all of that is done through a chat interface, typically in typing, but imagine that power. You can now type in a couple questions and essentially either get your ticket answered, first call resolution, which is valuable, or B, have it go kick off a ticket inside Remedy, which is certainly an older system, but suddenly you have a chat interface on it. What you've done is stretched out the life of Remedy, but you've also kind of refreshed it and taken something that is, certainly older technology and adapted it and brought it right up to very current standards by putting a chat interface in front of it and delivering value to the business. That's the big plus. That's the big kind of promise of chat and how it can start to be used to update old technology and sort of stretch their lifetime.
Okay, so we got another question here. One of the problems in bridging across legacy systems is that they own the data. Are there tools for bridging that data to the new multi-system paths you create?
Yeah, this is where they often become, this becomes very tricky. And this is where you have to start thinking about legacy, connectors that start to get across the firewall. Oftentimes, this is one of the big issues, right? So if it's a legacy system, it's installed on premise, it's behind the firewall, how do we bring that across? This is where you have to make use of the extensibility, the SDKs, the APIs, oftentimes bits and pieces of bridging technology to start to pull that information across. It's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to do. It's not going to take 2 minutes, but if the system has value, there are ways to go about doing it. What you don't want to have to do, you want to focus on starting to pull those things across. What you don't want to do is also have to wrestle with things like targeting, sign-ons, who the audience is. If your platform of choice deals with that thing, then you can wrestle with some of the issues you're alluding to in the question.
Okay, one last question. With all of this information on strategy, what is your recommendation for the first thing to do?
I think it's very important that as you get going, that you start to think about how to roll out mindfully. The pattern we've followed that we found to be very useful, especially as you look across broad audiences, find places of value. So for example, roll out notifications and approvals for managers first. Get them using the system. Get them liking the way the platform works for them. And then start to grow out the audience. Then focus on things that deliver value to them. This is why I picked onboarding. This is why vacation. This is why HR things like pay stubs are really great and valuable products because they deliver value on a very personal basis very early. So start with a sub-audience that's really kind of inundated in notifications, like managers, and then move out towards things that deliver value to stakeholders very quickly. Or, on the other hand, if you can find a line of business area that's running into a lot of issues, this is the example of field employees. If you can deliver value to them very quickly, that will actually start to get you rolling because they're people who are under stress. And if you can deliver value to them so they don't have to hop across multiple systems, that's valuable.
Great. Well, thank you. So that's it for the questions. Thank you very much to everyone who joined our webinar today. And thank you again, Frank, for a great presentation. We'll be following up shortly with recordings from today's webinar. If you think of any questions later on or want more information about Workgrid, you're welcome to get in touch with us at contact@workgrid.com. With that, thank you for joining. Be well.